All right, yield nerds, we are on episode 90, and I feel like I am like that giraffe. I am trying to keep my fixed income head above the water, and I thought I would share what I'm doing and hear your thoughts, and let's share our education to each other. Well, couple new things. Welcome to new subscribers. I believe we're actually up to 211 now. And for those of you who are new, there is a playlist. It is called the Income Investing Roadmap that takes you sequentially. Consider using that instead of jumping into episode 90. Few disclaimers, standard stuff. I am not a wealth management advisor. I do not pitch products. I do not pitch politics. I am sharing my education and look forward to learning from you too. Well, how are we organizing this episode? We are going to stop here and say, hey, is there a case for a soft landing that I can make? I'm going to pretend to be Chairman Powell and say, here's why I think we're doing a good job, and here's why I think there'll be a soft landing. And you do you. And then we're going to dive deeper into CPI, the basis for how any of these assessments are made. And where do we go from here and my strategy for the rest of the year? Well, speaking of the CPI, it has a very long history. It was created with an index of 100 in August 1983. There was a basket of goods, and they said if you bought these set of things, and it would cost you $100. Now, it probably cost them $37.28, but they pegged it to 100 and said if you bought all of these, it would have cost you $100. And now they can go back and forward in time, and they can say those same goods, if you rewound time to 1940, something like that, would have cost you $35. And every year, then they could say, how much do those basket of goods cost? And that is the foundation of CPI. And as you can see, there literally are only two periods where CPI has gone down. If the benchmark of 100 is taken on August of 1983, that same basket of goods today costs $306. The two periods where we did see a reduction in CPI were the great financial crisis and COVID. That is about it. Every single other time, CPI has always gone up. So it's going to take something earth shattering for CPI to come down drastically. Remember that. So, having said that, if I were Chairman Powell, I would tell you, hey, you know what? Let's take the period from when CPI was created, which is August 1983, all the way up until COVID itself was, showing up and messing up the system. I would remind you that things that cost $100 in April 1983 already cost $258.61 by December 2019. And to put that in perspective, if I were to put it in a calculator and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, if I started with 100 and went 36 years and I ended up at 258, what is the compounded rate of return, which is the proxy for inflation? This tells you that inflation was 2.6% between 1983 before COVID. Now, when COVID came, our supply chain completely got messed up. And we started from that 250 something number and we ended at 306, which is where we are today. And as you can see, the curve from there up to here is just insane. And so COVID created disruptions that arguably are once in a lifetime event. And so if I was Chairman Powell, I would say if you use the same math and said if I started at 252 and within a 4-year period I ended up at 306, I would remind you inflation was 4.95%, much, much higher than the 2.8 or 2.9 that we had before. And these are circumstances not under my control. And however, I would say if you looked at the last 12 months we started at 295 something and we are at 306. And I would pat my own back and remind you that in the last 12 months, we have had an amazing control of inflation. We are at 3.3%. And I would say, you know what? If you were to go back to the pre-COVID numbers of 2.9% and compare it with 3.3%, this is where I would make the case that yes, I am engineering a soft landing. I'm keeping GDP growing. There isn't a recession. I'm keeping employment at full. And yeah, we're at 3.3, but we're kind of sort of approaching the magic number of 2.9. And that is my story. If I were Chairman Powell, I would indeed have made the case that we are in the right direction, we are doing it at full employment. How awesome. Well, so that's the story. And then we have to sit here and say, how is CPI calculated? Because that is the basis for everything else. And when I did this research, I was very amused. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a paper that says questions and answers about CPI, and I would encourage you to read that yourself. And allegedly, there are 24,000 people around the country who are the representatives of the population, if you will. And every quarter, they report what they bought. True story. And the Fed then sits around, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics sits around and says, okay, I'm going to take your diary of purchases every 2 weeks and say, what did you buy last week? Interesting. Oh, okay, well, good. Where did you go? You went to Costco. And so on. So they poll them every 2 weeks. They take the diary of their purchases, and that is how that $100 basket from 1983 is adjusted. And when I ask, what did you buy? It is very, very specific. So literally, for these 24,000 people, they would be asked, what brands of cheese do you buy? Oh, okay, well, you buy Kraft. Well, what kind of cheese do you buy? You buy cheddar, okay. How many slices are there? Literally, they would initiate coverage of 8-ounce, 12-slice Kraft cheddar cheese and put that in the basket of goods and start measuring that over time. And so it's about as scientific as you can reasonably expect. It's not perfect, but prices of 80,000 items are collected, and these shoppers, 24,000 shoppers, apparently go to 23,000 retail and service locations, some online, some not online, and they write that down, create the basket, and that is the massive data collection effort that creates the CPI. And you look at the components of it and the results of it, this is the average American in urban areas. And it's a shocker to me that they spend 40 cents on the dollar on housing. That's a stunning number to me. And, it includes mortgage payments, it includes utilities, it includes a whole bunch of other stuff. But as you can see, housing is a very, very big ticket item. Transportation is another big ticket item. And then comes food and beverages. And then I thought, gee, I wonder how this compares with me. And so I went to my credit card statements and my bank statements and started writing down, and there are reports you can run. And, I'm very thankful to say I'm not in the 40% bracket for housing. I am also not in the 17% bracket for transportation. I would very humbly argue that COVID has probably changed the numbers for transportation for all of us. To what degree, I don't know. And I am guilty as charged. My food and beverage expense is much higher than 16, and my recreation is higher than 6. And so that was a big learning lesson for me, that my spending that I saved in housing and transportation looks like I'm blowing it away in food and beverages and recreation. So the reason I highlight this is your CPI may be different than the average urban or the average rural American. And so now that you understand your CPI, how CPI is calculated, and my version of Chairman Powell, who says we are very close to a soft landing, we are at 3.3, we just need to go to 2.8, and I will claim victory. Then the question is, what happens to the rate increase cycles, and what happens when I stop raising rates? Well, one of three things have to happen. So this is not a choice. This is not, let's just assume life is perfect. When rate increases stop, either demand gets disrupted. By that I mean people say, ooh, these rates are too high, I'm not going to buy homes anymore, or I'm not going to buy clothes anymore, or I'm not going to buy certain other things anymore. So, the consumer stops buying. People lose jobs because if you don't go to these stores and you buy stuff, the store owner says, I'm going to close the store. And third, companies' earnings get disrupted. One or more of these three will happen when rate increases reach their peak. If you read the news today, there is a lot of talk about how the American consumer is strong, so demand is not being disrupted. You also are going to see that the job market is insanely strong, historically low unemployment numbers. And that means the cracks are going to start happening in the earnings side. Every company that raises prices will reach a point where people say enough is enough. I'm not buying a $7 dozen eggs, or whatever the case may be. And it is the crash of earnings that will then lead the companies to decrease dividends or lay off people, and the layoffs of people will destruct demand. So we may well indeed start from the right side of the screen to the left, and that is where we're paying attention to earnings everywhere. Speaking of earnings, let's see how they are going. Every time there was a recession, earnings per share increased leading up to that very point. Rates, interest rates were also going up right along with, and right as recession set in, earnings crashes from 26 to 50% insane reduction in earnings. And as earnings per share decreases, as we saw earlier, the job market will have some problems and demand will get disrupted one way or the other. That is what happens. And you kind of see that spring kind of coiling where earnings per share is actually increasing. Now, I would very humbly argue some of this is manufactured because there are a lot of share buybacks. And if you buy back outstanding shares, your earnings per share will indeed increase. So there may be some inflated effort here, but the spring is fully wound, in my opinion. And the real metric is not just whether earnings go up or not, by how much does sales grow. In other words, if I increase sales by 5% and my earnings increase by 1%, that's great. But if I increase sales by 5%, or if my sales actually drops by 5%, if I increase prices by 1%, some of you will have watched the earlier episode where Medifast increases their price. They go for earnings growth, but their sales torpedoes. So when that happens in a broader picture, where a lot of companies pursue earnings growth and they increase prices, but they have devastation in sales growth, that may be what is on the way. And if you look at the data, what it is showing is companies are increasing prices, and in some cases, it leads to the destruction of sales growth, in other cases, not. And so that may indeed be what is coming. The last 1 month in the markets have been turbulent. The market has seen 3 and 4% drops, in some cases 7% drops, and then it's trying to go back and forth. I am like this giraffe in a sweater. I don't know what is going on. I sit in a very, very stable portfolio because I don't take a lot of risk. And when there is a time of uncertainty, I just climb up and see what I can do. My 6-month returns are still at 1.5. Some of you may remember I went to cash during the debt ceiling scenario for a reasonable chunk of my portfolio and put it back into the market. So please disregard that up and down. But in general, over a 6-month period, I'm at 1.5. This actually does not include my withdrawals and expenses that I can add back. So I get about 6% state tax free a year. If you look at the last month, it still barely registers in my portfolio. The market went up and down 7% and on to 4%, and my portfolio stays flat. And there is a reason for that. And that reason is because I stay very, very heavy in fixed income. Let me explain more. All we need to do right now is predict 3 things, and we'll be a genius. We need to know when the first earnings recession will show up, and when interest rates will be cut. And then, oh, by the way, when the earnings recession does happen, the equity market will crash. As soon as you find out the answer to these 3 questions, please call me, because I can make very educated decisions. I'm being facetious. I have no clue about any of these. You do you, without knowing when the earnings recession will hit, when the job market will have some problems and then lead to demand destruction. The fantasy that somehow we can continue to increase earnings while inflation is flat and unemployment stays at historic lows is indeed a fantasy, in my opinion. I do not subscribe to it, and so I'm going to go into my shell. What do I mean by that? Because I am clueless, I am now into 90% fixed income and 10% equities. That's just the way I roll, and that is what I'm choosing to do. You do you. I am decreasing risk because I suspect that the spring is winding tighter and tighter, and there will be an earnings recession sooner or later. And in that fixed income scenario, I'm going into two sides, treasuries and agencies in one side, and this is collateralized debt obligations. I am not endorsing that ETF by any means. I'm just using that as an example. Collateralized debt will be the last one to give if there is indeed an earnings recession, because the assets of the company are collateralized against the debt. And so those are the two sides of the bar that I'm pegging my returns on. I'm putting things in a very, very short duration, less than 1 year. And so as you can see, pretty much 60% of my portfolio matures within 1 year. I am adding duration in the 2 year time frame, but very, very slowly. And so all said and done, you may think I am a little too much in the John Smith column here. John Smith passed away because of too much moderation. Poor John Smith. So I have to sit here and say, am I being extremely conservative? And I ask the question, what is my cost of being wrong? Number one, there may be the greatest bull market. We are going to go up, up, up from today, and I missed the low point. I'm taking my pick. I don't think that is the case. It is also possible that the market will crash next week, and I missed it because I went and bought all these treasuries. Remember, the treasury that you buy at $98 for $100 par will appreciate every single day as it goes from 98 to maturity. And so I can sell those T-bills as a profit from my cost basis, still recover my 100% that I paid, the 98 cents that I paid, and then some. And if the market crashes, I will go in and buy at that time. In the meanwhile, I am happy to earn 5.5% plus state tax. So my cost of being wrong are very, very low. I'm kind of like that cool giraffe here saying, I'm just going to T-bill and chill. I don't care. You may look at it differently. I would love to hear how you are thinking about it. Are you T-billing and chilling, or are you taking more risk because you believe we are going to have a soft landing? Let me know. Thank you, and have a nice day.